Everybody, welcome to Learn with Math. This session we are going to be talking about how to perform a fill operation. So first, what is fill? When you have to repeat one thing over a large field of numbers, then that process is so repetitive. Say for example, you have to compute the total for different set of numbers over the same set of data. So the problem is you have to do that over a long time and you keep doing the same thing. So Excel makes that easy. You can compute that calculation once and fill the same formula to every other cell in that same data set and get results according to the entries that were in the data set. Now let me explain that better using this Excel sheet. Now for example, this is a representation of a weekly sale for a store. So the week starts on Monday and ends on Sunday. So we want to know, suppose this is week one. Week one is 24th, 30th of, I started on the 30th of December 2024 and ended on the 5th of January 2025. Now we want to compute the total sales for each of the week in the year 2025 for this store. So what we do is we're supposed to normally add or compute the summation of these cells here to be what is supposed to be in this cell, in the J cell, which is total week cells. So in order to do that, I'll use the formula. Right? I'll come here and say equal to sum. Remember that I'm adding from Monday of week one, which is C. The cell identity here is C1, C2 rather, C2. So I say C2 to C2 to I2, C2 to I2. I close the bracket and click enter. Now it calculates only the total sale for the first week of 2025. But I want to calculate the total sale for all of the weeks in 2025 until the last week in 2025. Now, ordinarily, I would have to use this same formula and do this thing repetitively over that long period of time. So it makes my work tedious. What if my set of data is so long? Okay, this one stops in 54 because there are 54 weeks in 2025, right? What if my set of data gets to 1,000? What if it gets to 10,000? Would I be inputting the formula for each of the cells to calculate the total week cell? It becomes too tedious. So Excel makes it quite easy. You can use the fill operation. Use the fill operation to fill the same data for the whole data field there. So you get the total sales for each of the week in 2025 without having to input the formula all over again. Now filling, when you fill it, it's not going to repeat the total sale for week one. It's going to calculate the total sale for each week and input it correctly into the fields that like correspond to each of the week. So let's say, how do we do this? We can do this in two ways. So you move your cursor to the end of, when you select the box, say for example, I have calculated the first total sale for the week. I select that box, I move my cursor to the end of that box until it becomes a cross. When it becomes a cross, I right click, I left click and drag down. I drag down until the end of my data. I'm going to keep dragging down until I get to the end of my data, which is supposed to be 54. Yes, so this is the end of my data, 54, and I release. It's going to automatically compute the totals for each of the week in the year 2025. Now, if you look closely, you see that the total computed are different. The total here is different from the total here, is different from the total here, it's different from the total here. That's because it is taking the data that you've entered into each of the row For example, this is row 7, and for row 7, let's color row 7. Let's fill row 7 with a different color so you see properly. Let's say yellow. So for row 7, it doesn't use the data that is expressed in row 3 to calculate the total for row 7. The total here corresponds to the set of data in this row. When you perform a fill operation, for a calculation that you would have done over a couple of number of times, you don't have to do that anymore because fill operation automatically fill the data for you. So when you do one total cell, we use the same formula. Let's click on this. It will use the same formula here. But the formula has changed. For example, when you click on the first calculation that I made, the first formula I imputed, you see that the specification for the formula is C2 up here. If you're looking up here, you see that it is equal to sum C2 to I2. Now let's click on this one after I perform the fill operation. You see that this is in row 11. So the formula specifies that this is the sum from C11 to I11. Note that it is 11, it is from C11, which is this cell, to I11, which is this cell. Now there's another way to perform fill operation without having to drag down. This is what I'm going to be doing with average. Now on the column that says average week cell, I'm going to calculate the first average. I'm going to calculate the average for the first week, the average cell for the first week. So I'll say I'll increase my formula here. I'll say equal to average. I'll also specify my cell number, average of C2. I'm doing for the first one, right? To I2. Remember, I'm doing average from Monday to Sunday. It's not included for total cell. I close the bracket and I click enter. It calculates the average for the first week for me. Now, I want that average to be calculated for each of the row in this entry. Instead of doing the drag down, I'll do the same thing. I'll come over here and trace it until the cursor becomes a cross. Now, when it becomes a cross, ordinarily I would have left click, then drag down, release for the field to be to come into place, right? For the field to fill the calculation for each of the cells and produce the result. But I'll not do that. What if I have very large array of numbers or array of entries? Doing that would mean dragging and dragging and dragging, and it can take time. So what I simply do here is I'll double click. When my cursor becomes a cross, I'll double click and it will automatically fill the column with the calculation of each of the rows according to the data that is entered into that row. So you can see from here that it filled from the beginning of that data set to the end of that data set with the average cell per week. So two ways to fill data automatically after you've made the first calculation. Is either you drag down when the cursor becomes a cross at the end of the selected cell, or you double click. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.